Hello and welcome to Of God and Man. This is your ever-loving, attractive, handsome devil of a host, Brahman. We also have Dr. Travis Stevens, who's and then we got Brian Budka, that has a perfect head, and we can tell because there is no hair. And
a nice shine.
It is great to be with you. Before we get into it, we do want to address what happened this past Sunday in a church, a Mormon church. Vehicle drove in. Well, somebody drove a vehicle into church building, shot and killed several people, and then caught it on fire. None of the hosts on the OGM of God and Men network happen to be Mormon. Not one of us are Mormon. However, we have all been called a cult. Matter of fact, I was called a cult. We were called a cult just, or at least we were made aware of it this last week. And one of those reasons that we could be called cults is because we believe that there is, we're true monotheists. And when I say that, what I mean is we don't believe that there are three persons that make up God, but that God revealed himself in different ways, and he revealed himself as the Father, as the Son, as the Holy Ghost. Having said that, because we're not Mormon does not mean that we cannot weep with those who weep and mourn with those who mourn. And so our hearts and our prayers and our thoughts go out to all of those involved. And we too, we know what it's like to be called and considered a cult. And you know what? We still can follow Jesus, and we can love people even if their doctrinal issues are not like ours, if we believe something different. Either of you have anything you want to say about it?
One of my clients in my day job, sales management, is they're based in Utah. They do happen to be Mormon, and probably even different. Even within the LDS church, right? Just like within any other denomination, there's some variations. So there are a couple different, I'll say variations for lack of however they might describe it, if that makes sense. But, and I've worked with Mormons in the past, and always enjoyed my experience. And I didn't work with all Mormons, so I'm sure there's some terrible ones out there. Like there are all kinds of terrible people because that's an individual issue. But
right.
Yeah, I agree. I think Jesus said that when his disciples said they were shutting down some folks who were casting out demons in his name, he's like, hey, whoa, if they're not against us, go easy. I'm not sure how we apply that across the board, but I certainly think there is that can be a pretty healthy approach. Doesn't mean, like you said, Bram, we don't have to ignore maybe some doctrinal differences, but I don't think that the LDS church is against other Christians. So I think there's times to lock arms and be together.
Right. Travis?
Absolutely. We have to lock arms. And I think it goes beyond more than just an attack on the LDS church. And we're seeing this retaliation, this hatred that is being pushed onto Christians. You know, a lot of the news isn't talking about the 10-year, I'm just going to call it what it is, genocide, where over 100,000 Christians have been massacred in Africa, in the countries of Congo and Nigeria and Mozambique, where those I'm just called like it is, those Muslim-led rebels are trying to eradicate Christians from those countries. And we're seeing that spread to the United States as well. It's been something nonviolent for the most part, where Christians have been suppressed. You see we're at a point right now where Christianity, the Christian belief, can be openly mocked by politicians, by celebrities on TV and music. However, if you were to do the same thing towards, let's just say, Islam, you would be censored, you would be cut off, you would be considered to be, some sort of ist or bigot, racist, or, Islamophobic, or whatever words they want to attach to you. But Christians have been under persecution for a while, and we're starting to see that, transpire here in the United States. It wasn't too long ago, but a month or so ago, We had that attack on the Catholic school, right, where those students were killed just 2 years ago. In Nashville, we had a Christian school that was attacked, and there was a school shooter there. We're seeing these attacks become more and more frequent with, for whatever reason, people are deciding to target, Christians, Christianity. We talked about Charlie Kirk last time. That could be considered both a political and a religious assassination. And so I hate this trend that we're seeing, and we're living in the last days, no matter what we want to acknowledge or not, and that violence that we've really been devoid of here in the United States towards Christianity is starting to rear its ugly head very consistently here in our country.
Right. It reminds me when we had the shooting in Sutherland Springs, which ironically was, the media talked about it very briefly and then moved on because it was actually stopped by somebody else that was armed. But Sutherland Springs, from where we live, is probably 15 minutes.
Yeah.
I pastor in Seguin, but I'm right in between Sutherland Springs and Seguin. And it's really interesting to see how the culture has just progressively grown worse and worse. But that's biblical, and that's what happens when we draw away from the Lord.
It is, and it is something that we need to address as well. My kind of mantra that I've been going on lately is that we have to start addressing these issues from the pulpit, because no longer are we in a place where politics is separate from the church. It's made its way to the church, and the reason I bring that up right now is I like to have a well-rounded view, and so I follow a lot of, obviously, conservatives because I'm conservative, but I also follow some liberals, and one liberal that I like to follow and listen to is Bill Maher, and he is a hardcore, proclaimed, unashamed atheist, and on his show last week, he went on this tirade about the media saying, look, they're eradicating and committing genocide in Africa. They're butchering Christians, and shame on y'all for not talking about it. Shame on y'all for and he was kind of talking what we're talking about right now. He's like, Christians are being persecuted worldwide right now, and this needs to stop. He wasn't looking at it from a biblical perspective, but he was addressing an issue that nobody else is really addressing right now in our country.
Yeah. I think one of the absolutely right, and it's shameful. It's shameful that we're not talking about these kind of things. But one of the cool things about the day that we're living in is that we have a platform where we can put that stuff out there.
Absolutely.
Back in the day, we had Walter Cronkite, and that was it. Or the three main networks. I think another good thing that came out of this, Steven Crowder, whether you're a big fan of him or not, at least, so if you don't know who he is, he was Charlie Kirk before Charlie Kirk, or before I knew who Charlie Kirk was, I knew Steven Crowder. And he's the one that we've got all the memes, where he's got the prove me wrong or whatever and then you could put your own notes and, when you make that meme. And I appreciate the fact that people are at the point where, I'm going to speak up. And he's been very frank about it. The reason that he stopped doing it was because there were threats on his life, because people were attacking him. And so then he backed up out of it. And then after the assassination of Charlie Kirk, he stepped back into that role.
He actually go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, sorry. Go ahead.
I say he went to SMU in Dallas, and what was sad is as I follow him, but what was sad is that in preparation for that, he literally put on armor. He put on body armor. He made sure that he had bulletproof stuff around him, because he is rightfully scared for his life. Because to be a Christian, to be a conservative right now in our country, seems to literally be a position where you have a target on your head.
Yeah. And it's to hold a view, right? And I think that's one of the craziest things. And then to hear the chants, like the people that like words are violence. No, I'm sorry. Words aren't violence. You know what's violence? shooting people. That's
Yeah.
violent. You know, beating somebody up, throwing a Molotov cocktail at somebody. That's violence. Words aren't violence. And in that aspect, I think colleges have done us a great disservice, because we haven't, we've watered down terminologies and words to say things that they actually are the exact opposite, right? Like mostly peaceful protests.
Yeah.
No, I'm sorry. I saw those videos. Those weren't mostly peaceful,
Right.
right?
Those were riots and people burning down their town. Yeah, and
Yeah.
we've the progressive community, regardless of party, but progressives, done a very good job with language, right, in convincing the populace that words can be violence, which I agree they are not. In some of these battles, intellectually, maybe culturally, have almost been lost when anyone passes some hate speech law, right?
Yep.
Because
Yep.
speech is akin to thought. And,
Right.
when someone's being shot because of the things they've said, we're really saying Charlie Kirk was shot because of the things he thinks and the ideas he has. And when
Right.
college campuses will say that, ideas are violence, that is the last place that should be the case, right? I spoke with our kids right after the Charlie Kirk assassination when we found out that he had died, that you should be able to go to college and be mature enough to hear ideas that are very contrary to how you were raised, and not end up in the fetal position bawling your eyes out, and certainly not be eager to then shoot or harm someone because of it.
Right.
And see, we should be able then to respond with reasons and ideas and statistics of why we believe what we do, and not be fearful of the ideas, right? Because the progressives have generally, in the last few decades, certainly more than one presidential cycle, have decided that if you disagree with me, you hate me, and then we'll say things, we'll throw these bombs, these word bombs, like you're a racist or you're a Nazi. And it really is, without being facetious, it's akin to saying, Brahm, have you stopped beating your wife? You're like,
Yes, for the
what?
record, I did.
Yeah. And you're like, oh, well, if I say no, because I don't beat her, no is yes. Yes, I stopped beating. Like, no, your premise is flawed. I was
Right, because I never beat
beating.
my wife.
Right, I was never beating my wife, and
Exorbitantly.
it's just one of those things that, like, well, if I call this person a racist or I say they're hateful, that I've just won. That's my ace card. That's my get out of jail free card, as opposed to having some discussion. And
Well, it's your I don't have an argument card.
yes, and we've seen that with, again, that the Mormon congregation, LDS congregation, would experience immense bloodshed and their building burnt down because whether someone on the right or the left or in between decides we don't like their theology, that's just terrible. It's there was a time, I think, on the right that there were some abortion clinics that had maybe doctors that got harmed, maybe even killed, and
Right. We saw that sometimes. Yeah.
Generally, churches, Christians would say, no, that's not the right approach, right? That's, yes, abortion is wrong, but killing the abortion doctor is not a solution.
It's just as wrong.
Right. And it is impressive that Steven Crowder's back out, that the convince me I'm right, change my mind type thing is, prove me wrong, change my mind, I think is fantastic. And I hope many more people do that, because that is how we at least engage in dialogue. We can make a difference. And, for anyone who sits behind that table, so to speak, and says, change my mind, maybe sometimes their arguments will be terrible. they'll get it wrong, but that's how they will learn. And certainly any of those, if it's a college campus, those young people, those young adults, when they come up, they'll probably get it wrong. Some of them might do a great job, but for either side, that practice of I'm willing to look a little foolish in order to improve my argument, that's been my approach. And I've probably got it wrong most times. But I know that if I do it often enough, and then I take some time to study before the idea is discussed, I will eventually get better. I have to be willing to look a little foolish and get it wrong in order to get better, like riding a bike,
Absolutely.
right? We're going to fall down.
Right. Well, I like that because it's saying I'm willing to not only listen to your side and hear what you have to say, but I'm open to the fact that you might change my mind.
Right.
And that's a dialogue that we're not seeing. And I hate to put the left in one corner, but a lot of people on the left, at least the vocal ones, aren't willing to let anybody have that dialogue with them, nor are they willing to change their mind. They use that harmful Reddit where they call you, a bigot or some sort of ist word, or, and then they start inciting violence by calling people racist and fascist. And then you have these outliers who are already mentally unstable because they do what these people have done. You have to be mentally unstable, who hear people that think similarly to them saying, well, this individual is a racist, they're a fascist, they're a Nazi, and they're hearing that and they're like, well, then I gotta do something about it. And so that is where that language, what the left is accusing us of being using harmful words, their words are extremely harmful because they're inciting violence from these mentally unstable people. And in another fair swoop is they are demeaning the millions of individuals who lost their lives in World War II to actual fascists and Nazis, right, because that's the reality of what those individuals did in the 1930s and 40s. That is nothing near what anybody is doing here.
Very good point.
Throw that in. I didn't mean to cut you off, Brian, but
well, now I'm going to cut you all both off.
All good.
You're the host with the most.
Oh, thank you. I knew it wasn't just me that thought that. So it reminds me, back in the day, you remember they were talking about if you could go back and kill Hitler in the womb, would you do it? And anybody that said no, what? You would let Hitler live? Like it's like, yes, that's an unborn child. That's innocence. Yeah.
That's abortion.
Right. That's murder of innocence. So then what makes you, right, if you're murder is wrong. Separate from justice, right? That's a whole different debate, whether or not the government should take life. But as a Christian, obviously, then no, I'm not for murdering Hitler in the womb. Now, that probably, to the left, would then peg me as I'm a Nazi. So it's hard to have that with people that are not as thoughtful. Like, for instance, is Brian, right? Brian tends to be pretty thoughtful. He thinks out his positions. Me, I just spew a bunch of garbage all the time. We all know this, right? But, and Travis, you're very thoughtful as well, which is why we have to have you guys on the show, because can you imagine anybody listening to just Brom? But we're dealing with people that are not thinking out their thoughts clearly. They're not going up to the table, at least the far left, right? They're not, and we can't really compare the far left. And when I say that, I'm talking about America, the United States. We can't compare the far left from the far right, unless we start getting to like some of the alt-right, like Nick Fuentes or whatever, and then we start getting off the rails, right? But the same process or the same concepts, that they're not the same, because the right, you're not hearing them talking about killing somebody because we disagree with their views. We're not rejoicing when somebody dies. And that was something else that broke my heart when I heard that there were people that were glad that the Mormon church was attacked, that the LDS church was attacked. They were glad because it's false doctrine. Okay, so if it's false doctrine, then they don't know the truth. If they don't know the truth, then they're lost. So you're going to be happy that lost people are going to hell. There's something wrong with your thinking. We've got to get back, as a church in general, we've got to get back to biblical thought processes.
Yes, there'd be a time to reach out. That would
I think you're muted, Travis, or is that on purpose? And Brian, I agree. Yes, we have to reach out. Yeah. And this is the time to show them that compassion and love.
Right.
That's what
I was trying to figure out how to mute myself the whole time I had to cough, and then I accidentally did it. So
fantastic. So we do also want to spend a little time talking about the government shutdown that we're now the second day in. As while we're recording this, we're the second day in, and now neither Brian or myself, we're both very politically minded. But Travis, you've actually run for some positions. So why don't we start with you? What is your takeaway from where the American government is at the moment?
Well, that's a whole nother podcast. He said I ran for something. He said it doesn't make me an expert, and you'll be surprised how many people, as long as you can pay the fee, anybody can run for something. So, but I appreciate the confidence in allowing me to go first. So, government shutdown. Just a couple of things. I'm not going to bore people and get cut off. But this unfortunately is something that happens regularly in our country, essentially as a way to throw a political fit. In fact, in the past 50 years, it's happened 21 times. It's happened before with President Trump back in 2018. It happened with President Obama back in 2013 when he shut the government down in order to pass Obamacare. Trump's was about getting money for the border wall at the time. And so this isn't a Republican or a Democrat thing. This is something that happens in our country. Now, right now, you have two very different versions of the story of what's happening, depending upon if you're watching CNN or Fox. And both are using tidbits of the truth to reach their base. I got an email from my lovely Congressman, Joaquin Castro, not personal, went out to everybody in the district. And his headline was, "Conservatives have shut down the government." So he's looping in not just Republicans, but anybody that thinks conservatively, because he's trying to reach his demographic, which is an older age group of people who care about the issue of Medicaid, which is what this is about. Just to sum it up real quick, because I don't want to, take control of the conversation. But what this is really about is it comes down to Medicaid and the way that Republicans are seeing it, the way that Democrats are seeing it. What Republicans are having an issue with is there is a loophole in Medicaid in the wording that was introduced by President Biden's administration. If you are not a citizen of this country, you are not eligible for Medicaid. It's plain and simple. No one can argue that. The loophole that Democrats have created underneath President Biden was that if you are labeled as an asylum seeker or a refugee, you are eligible for Medicaid. Now, we know what President Biden did. Anybody and everybody that had a way to cross the border was automatically listed as an asylum seeker or a refugee under his administration. And so you then had, not just tens of thousands, millions that crossed the border illegally that were labeled as asylum seekers and or refugees that were now eligible for Medicare or Medicaid. Republicans are saying, nope, we don't want that anymore. Done, over, no more funding. I don't care what you call anybody. If they're not an American citizen, they should not be eligible for Medicaid. That's what the Republicans are upset about. Democrats are upset because under the big, beautiful bill that passed, I don't know what it seems like so much has happened, but Trump hasn't even been in office for a year yet.
No kidding.
I was going to say at the beginning of his second term, we're still in the beginning of his second term. We just barely hit 6 months on here, but they're upset because when that was passed, there was cuts that were made to Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act, and they want those cuts. In fact, it was a little over $1 trillion that was cut. And their argument is that American premiums for those that have private insurance are going to go up on average about $300. And for those that are currently underneath the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, their premiums are, on average could go up about $900. And so that's their argument. That's what they're upset about, is that, look, you guys took money away. The Republicans, and I'm wrapping it up because I know there's two other people here to talk, but the Republicans' rebuttal to that is like, the 1 trillion that we cut were for fraudulent, fake, dead people that were there for not non-U.S. citizens, or people that just weren't eligible, like they're able-bodied people that should be working and they shouldn't be recipients of Medicaid. And so that's what Republicans are saying. So now you have this standoff where Democrats are out there and they're telling the truth to people. They're saying they cut money, but they're not being entirely truthful in terms of what money was cut from Medicaid. And Republicans, and I already went over that, I'm going to go over the argument again, but are using the whole, illegals have Medicare, Medicaid, but they're not telling you the whole issue in terms of it was because of this loophole, and we got to close this loophole is what we're actually doing. So it's going to be interesting over the next couple of days, weeks. For us, for government employees, it's not fair. They're not getting paid. I do know as someone who was in the military, my dad, not me, when we went through this underneath President Clinton, and he didn't get paid for, I think it was 21 days. They did get their back pay, but back pay doesn't help when your bills don't backdate.
Yeah,
So
that's a good point.
I'm done. I'll shut up for the next couple minutes.
I do want to throw in there that when you said standoff, I'm very proud of myself. I think both of y'all should be proud of me, because my initial response would have been a Mexican standoff, since it's talking about illegal immigration. So
it's great that you didn't say that.
Yeah, that's borderline racist, because not every illegal's from Mexico. In fact, it's a very low percentage. They're from other countries. So
yeah, very true, very true.
Just
Just be coming up through that border. So
it's a French thing to say.
That's a French thing. Oh, touche. So one of the things that's got me a little excited is the thought. Now, this is ridiculous, because the government's supposed to be shut down, and yet 85% of the government is still running, because that's considered essential. We have to have that 85%.
Right.
Okay, so if that's the case, then let's let the 15% go, and they can find work in the private sector and call it a day, and we have just saved the taxpayer, 15% minimum. I would expect, and probably end up being more than that. So when I was younger, I've been libertarian minded since I was little bitty. As a matter of fact, I made my dad go vote for Reagan both times. So in 1980, I was born in 76, so I was 4 years old, and I told my dad to go vote for Reagan. I did it again 4 years later. So I've always been, and part of the reason was a couple different, right? Reagan talked publicly about God, and I thought that was really cool. And the other thing was, government needs to get off your back. And I couldn't agree more. 15%. Now, I am not for, let me back up. If we can survive without that 15%, then why do we need them? Now, I heard a rumor, I don't know whether or not it's true, but that Trump has worked behind the scenes so that because there's the shutdown, they're going to lay off those 15%, and then those people.
I heard that too.
Right? Okay.
Well,
so I'm not the only one.
I can answer that for you real quick, just because I was dealing with this or researching this, looking for it, and studying this when it comes to AI, because and that's a whole other podcast too, because of the way AI is taking over things, it's taking over jobs. If you were to get, let's just say our society has a lot of made up, useless jobs just to keep people employed. That's just the way it works, because people need to work and people need money. And so could we realistically be without that 15%? Well, absolutely. And we could run more efficiently, but you would have a huge amount of people that would now enter or leave the workforce that necessarily wouldn't have a job that they could get anywhere else. And same thing with AI. And so there's discussions, and we're going to have to revisit this as a country, as AI takes things over and people become obsolete. How are we going to give people money? How are they going to earn some sort of living? What are they going to do? Are we just going to give people stipends?
Universal income, buddy. There we go. True communism. Here you go.
Borderlines communism.
That's why I threw it out there.
You know what the solution? The solution is we let them suffer. That's the solution.
I mean, that's
And
communism too.
no. That is a communism would be forced suffering. No, the reason one of the ways we can bring pricing back down is with inflation. The government has to stop printing money. That's inflation is caused exclusively by too many dollars chasing too few goods when the government is printing.
Right.
The Federal Reserve, it's not the government. The Federal Reserve prints money because the federal government needs to borrow it. So the federal government decides we have Travis's dog likes our conversation. Is agreeing. The federal government goes into debt, and their bank of choice is the Federal Reserve, which is neither federal nor has any reserves. And they put a journal entry into the books, and then they print the money, literally making it out of thin air. That's inflation. But to see pricing come back down too, unemployment's a necessary part of it, in all candor. And the solution is let those people go find jobs, because the cliche, necessity being the mother of invention, is indeed true. And while I would not wish that on myself or others, it is necessary to have that need and then go to invention. And that could be that they do something different. And while technology is going to continue to improve and change jobs, it always happens at a rate that those people that get a little hungry will find some other need and solve it. Now, in the interim, that is a great place for the church to do some things. If in the body of believers in your congregation, a federal or local or some other taxpayer burdened employee loses their job, then come together and take care of them, while saying, remember that Paul said, if you don't work, you don't eat. So I'll feed you dinner, but the next time you can cut my yard. I mean, there should be dignity in this. And we come together and say, I'm sorry you lost your job, but you did it on the back of taxpayers. So when you work for Rome, we're not going to punish you, but don't feel bad when on the very rare occasions the job goes away. And God made GoFundMe for a reason. If we start cutting Medicaid and Medicare, and it's never really an actual cut, almost always it is, I'm proposing a 50% increase over last year's budget. Oh my goodness, Congress only gave me a 15% increase. There was a 35% reduction in Medicaid. No. We had this arbitrary number we want it to be. Now, on some rare occasion that maybe they cut one particular line item, the total net bottom usually is larger. But in this case, let's say they actually make an actual human-based cut. Like the number went from 10 to 9 with however many zeros behind it, and there's a legitimate cut. No one is forbidden by law by either A, donating to their neighbor free of charge, oh, here's some more, or donating to that trap in DC called the federal government. You could donate. Now, they probably don't earmark it for the way you want, like your local congregation would. But lo and behold, you can donate to the federal government. All those, and I would say for the local politicians, if they're really worried about their constituents, set up the GoFundMe. Go do some of those things, because we know that the federal government is bloated. And again, in a local congregation, we can care for our own, but I would give someone a free meal that's in my congregation, but at some point they're going to work, and not because I'm mean, but because that's how God designed us. And a little bit of necessity goes a long way.
Can we also talk about, let's talk about, and there's rhetoric going on both sides, but if you actually read the budget proposals, Democrats are wanting to fund illegals, right? We give them Medicaid. They are also in their bill, in their budget proposal, are wanting to spend millions upon millions of dollars in other countries promoting green endeavors. And so I guess what my question is, when did the Democratic Party become so infatuated with everyone and everything that is not American? And instead of looking at our constituencies, we had these Democrats chasing around, that Obrego guy, when we still had U.S. hostages in Gaza. Not a one went to go, let's go try to release all the Palestine supporters and protest here? What about why weren't they trying to, get into contact with them? There's so many Americans that are in need of help. Um, we know what I would respect from the Democrats. Okay, if you're really, why don't you fight for those single parents or those that are disabled or those that are homeless or veterans and say we need to give them additional cuts. Let me fight for them. Let me work for them. Let me do something. But no, it's let me fight for people who are not citizens of this country. And the reason why it makes Republicans, especially Republicans like me, maybe look heartless, is because in my head, I'm thinking, well, what's the benefit of being a U.S. citizen? I have no benefit for being a citizen if I want to follow the Democrat platform. There is no difference between being a citizen and a non-citizen. In fact, there's more benefits to being a non-citizen. I pay almost $1,000 a month for my health care plan out of my pocket. It comes out of my paycheck for me and my family. It seems easier to give up my citizenship, go somewhere else, cross illegally, and get free health care and vote Democrat. Let's just be real, because that's who they're catering to. When did this party become so involved and supportive of non-Americans? And I know that may sound heartless, but we're our country. It should be America first. And you go to any other country, they're putting their people first for the most part, right? And it's about our people first. And we can't, and I'm going to end with this. If I am, and I'm going to make something up that not controversial, if I am just like, we need to save killer whales. We need to save killer whales. And that's everything I'm putting my money into, and I'm all about that. That doesn't mean I don't care about other animals. That just means that that's the one I'm most passionate about. And so why is it wrong then to say, okay, it's not that we don't care about other people, we don't care about other countries, but we're here primarily to focus on our people first. It's kind of like when you're in an airplane, you put the mask on yourself if it comes down and then help others. And right now, Democrats are like, let me pass the mask out to everybody else, and then we'll worry about the American people getting the mask on them. And they need to come back to reality. And they're playing from their own playbook that lost them the last election. And so I don't understand why they're not like, well, that didn't work. We realize the majority of Americans want focus on Americans and not non-citizens, but yet they're still willing to die on that hill. And the only thing that they're actually doing is winning the election for the foreseeable future for Republicans.
We probably need to ask why I think part of that challenge is so many of these foreign aid programs or money laundering programs for probably both parties, right?
You're right.
And I think the opportunity for believers is to begin and I would say we need to not even ask, how do we refine Medicare, Medicaid, but why do we have the government involved in healthcare or education or retirement? Any of those things are actually not constitutional to begin with, and push that back to the states and the cities and the individuals, right? Because so often we're really just asking for a kinder, gentler slave master. Then I say, why do we want to be enslaved at all? Let's stop asking for a kinder and gentler slave master, and let's look for emancipation versus, again, just don't beat me as much. I don't want to be beat at all.
Well, some of us are just so particular, man.
I know. Yeah. Some are just like, just beat me on Thursdays.
Yeah.
That would be okay. But we, it's not that healthcare for the indigent, regardless of how they got here, is bad. I think it's wrong for anyone to be taking anything that requires the labor of another is not your right or my right. I have no right. If your doctorate, if you were an MD, Dr. Stevens, and you're a physician, if you're a general practitioner, I have zero right to your labor. Zero. Okay. Now you could, if you see me
but we have a whole party.
you could come give me care, but I have no right to walk into your office and demand care because you're capable, because there was no one waiting. There's no one in line, Dr. Stevens. Take care of me. Yet we think that's true of whether it's education, healthcare, retirement, any of those things, and we call these things rights. And I think, again, as believers, we have to be at the forefront of being thoughtful and say, wait, we're asking the wrong questions. Let's ask
We are.
better questions and say, sure, we care for the indigent, we care for the home, we care for the needy, regardless how they got here. But medical care or education or retirement or any of those things, is it really something that we as believers, and forget the unbeliever, to our congregation, our fellow believers, do we have a right to the labor of our brother or sister against their will?
Well, we don't. The Bible is very clear about that. And I shouldn't have started quoting scripture before I remember the actual text. But if you don't have the right to, eat, if you don't work a fair day's, set of work is what the Bible says. And if you look at everything Jesus did. Because I'm glad you brought that up, Brian, because that's one thing non-believers love to throw down to conservatives. Well, Jesus would do this, or you're not being like Jesus, and you're being a hypocrite. He said to love others, and no human is illegal because everybody's supposed to be loved. Well, yes, but there's a difference between loving somebody and enabling somebody. And every time that Jesus showed love to somebody, he took away their excuses and said, look, you're healed, rise, take up your bed and walk. Do something to improve your life, right? I'm going to do this. Now go do this. Now go sin no more. Now, and he had them do something to get out of their situation. He wasn't just passing out, free food and health care for 3 years, like the Democrats want you to believe. That's not what he was doing. He was changing people's lives. Lazarus, guess what? He died again and didn't come back. Right? It wasn't this permanent, like, now you got a free get out of death pass for Lazarus. And there's a difference. We are to love people, but that doesn't mean that you have to love people and now all of a sudden you take on their issues and their problems permanently. He only fed the 5,000 once. Guess what? They had to go find food afterwards. It's just, and I'll stop because that's my soapbox there. So, and this is a family show. So,
well, he did feed the 4,000 and then the 5,000, or vice versa. But anyway, yeah, good point.
But not every day.
Well, even then, the boy that gave the 5 loaves and 2 fish, or 2 fish and 5, however it was broken out, the boy gave it. Right. And Jesus did this of all of his own accord. Right. So it is distinctly different. Any of us seeing a brother or sister in need and offering a meal or feeding them or paying their bills. And Brahm and I coming to the Stevens household and saying, well, we too, the majority, have decided that the Stevens household is going to donate some things to the other neighbor. And if you don't, we're sticking you in a cage. And we'll take your house and sell it to feed them, or whatever Brahm and I decided was the right thing to do with your stuff. And it frustrates me when politicians start using this is what Christians do, and in the same breath, we have one, a Texas politician who's working his way to get into higher office and is constantly talking about his version of Christianity. And as if Jesus would then go take his neighbor's stuff and extort it, he's just distorting the gospel. And it is so frustrating when that happens. Because
I think it's also important to remember that Jesus did not come he wasn't the governor of Rome.
Right.
He did not fill a political office. He was showing the church, this is what you do, not the government. And so when we have these politicians that are, or people with their political views that are pushing, the government should be doing that. So then what you're doing is you are taking it away from the church and giving it to the government. You're abandoning why the church exists. The church exists. What was pure religion? Pure religion was taking care of the fatherless and the widows, and that's pure religion. That's the church's responsibility. But if the government is taking all of our money, then how is the church going to go and feed the widow? How are we going to take care of the homeless? So it's totally backwards, and it navigates, it takes away the responsibility of the individual to step up and fill the role that God intended for them to fill. Because, well, I don't have to do it, because you can go get food stamps,
Right.
and you can go get on welfare, and they'll give you a credit card, and now you can get a car, you can get your own Obama phone, you can get all of those things. And so then where do we come in with the church? The church was designed and set up to not to come in with the government. We weren't not right. We were made, as a matter of fact, we supersede the government. Right? Jesus is bigger than the president. So we have to fill our roles. And man, I'm starting to sound so much like Brian. Dear Lord, I'm going to be sick, I think.
I love it. I love it.
We have to, but to hear the politicians, because the politicians will tell you, well, if you love the poor, we're going to feed the poor, and so then we have to take your tax dollars, and I need to do this through my organization or through the government. It's like, right. No, you don't. I can do that on my own. I've got the Samaritan's Purse. I've got all these other things, or I can do it myself without having to go through any of those and just find somebody in need. And I think that's a part of it, is the whole idea of why the church is here and why Jesus came is being robbed by political parties and their whether or not they have good intentions. Right. I don't know their heart, but it's still stealing from the church, the whole reason that we're here.
Well, the church is supposed to be primarily for the spiritual soul,
right?
The spiritual aspect of it, and that's long term. The physical aspect of it is the short term, helping the poor, helping the widows, and all of those things are biblical principles. It's pure religion, but it's not a long term. Well, we're going to sponsor this widow, for the next 50 years. Yep. It's we're gonna help this widow. We're gonna help this widow move. And how do I know that? Well, we'll look at the parable of the talents, where Jesus gave these talents and he expected them to do something with it. It wasn't I'm going to keep giving you talents. It was, here, take this, do something with it, grow it, make it better. And what you said earlier about, let me take and working off of somebody else, that was the first thing. That was the parable Nathan used when he went to David and said, hey, there's this guy that didn't want to kill his own lamb, and he went and stole his neighbor's, and David was outraged, and he's like, well, that was you took someone else's wife. But that same principle is there, where it's not that we're here, let me take this from you because I don't want to use mine. It's not biblical. And then, Brian, I feel like I cut you off, sir. I'm sorry. I feel like I do that a lot. I apologize. But
I think that one of the, and I think this applies whether it's education, healthcare, any of these things. I appreciate those who do try to work the legislative angle. That can be helpful. In my old age, and I wish I had not wasted so many years thinking otherwise, and I mean that sincerely, is that we, as the body, we have to ask those better questions. We have got to hold each other accountable, saying, well, I don't think we're asking the right question. Again, should the government be involved in X, Y, or Z to begin with? So that we're, again, I love I'm going to use we're asking for a gentler, kinder slave master. We need to be real candid about that, as abrasive as that will be. And then we have to create institutions that solve the problem with our own dollars and drain the system, so to speak. So here's an example. If the three of us came up with a better education model, optimally, we would create a model that would be focused on the student. It would be scalable to the situation. It would be low or close to no cost to mom and dad or whoever the caregiver is, and at the same time pay those who are involved very well. And what this would do in this imaginary hypothesis here is that when we drop Brian's super duper school system into the Stevens neighborhood, because it's only $50 a month per kid, probably everybody there can afford it. And when we convey that it is better for the Stevens kids and the French kids, etc., imagine that Brahm has now moved into your neighborhood and has children again, young children.
Sorry about that, Travis.
He's your next door neighbor. That when that local government assigned education center loses 25% of its students to the Imaginary Brian School, then what happens in that neighborhood is, after a time when that school starts to decline in attendance, naturally there's funds out there that the neighborhood people are going to say, wait a second, I'm paying twice, I don't like this. Then they can go back to the politicians to hold them accountable to budgets. And we have to do the same thing in every other aspect that we want drained. And we're going to have to provide an alternative that's better out of our own pocket in some way, and let the system get drained, and then hold. Because after a while, when people see their tax dollars being poorly spent, they will go back to the politician. And at some point, I don't know what the tipping point is, to use a Malcolm Gladwell term, there will be a number. Someone's probably done the math in different enterprises. At what point in a neighborhood do you drain the school enough in a positive way to where people go, oh, not only is that school might be shut down, or, we get a property tax reduction, but it's going to be things like that. Asking better, in my opinion, asking better questions, the church meeting the needs of its own first, so that there's not a need for extra government resources, and budgets could theoretically get reduced, and then moving outside of the walls, so to speak, of our congregation, right? The needs are, and then helping those in our neighborhood or wherever that are impacted, that aren't part of our congregation, and just kind of take it back. Because I think if we wait until we can get the legislative power to do it, and I'm not disagreeing, Brian, we're like, hey, our tax dollars going here, we don't have additional dollars. I think we have to still work knowing, sure, some folks will work the legislative angle, but that is pounding our head against the wall more often than not. Although some people, if they have that calling, God bless them, go after it. But more importantly, I think when we, the body of believers, ask better questions, make an alternative that is very reasonable and enticing and better than the other, then we start to make that impact. And that's painful, because I don't want to do it, quite frankly. My daughter's about out of school, and I'll be like, I don't even care about school anymore. I don't want to think about it. But I have a group that I get together with. We're really looking at the education problem and looking at those things where I talked about. Is it scalable? Is it something that could be super compelling so that it's so low cost that even the lowest income among us would say, I'm going to find a way to come up with $50 a month for my kid? Right? Or we have enough scholarships that we can offset that. And that if you're a teacher in our system or an administrator, you are well paid. You're paid better than the government run system. And we find a positive way to drain it. And the same would be true of Medicare, Medicaid, whatever else. I think that's what we have to do. But it's uncomfortable because it requires me to do things I don't want to do.
But
Mostly as a
here's
disciple
why
of Jesus.
you asked me why, or you asked me, Brom, a little while ago to I know we need to wrap up. I'm sorry we're getting close to that time, but because I've been in politics a little bit, you have these. Here's why that's hard, Brian. Because that's extremely that's doable, and that's what needs to happen for our country. But you have politicians on both sides of the aisle that they need votes, and how do they do that? The whole blanket system doesn't work anymore. So you go out and you get pockets. If I can get this interest group, if I can get this group, if I can get this group, if I can get this group. And so you go and support things that may be bad for other groups because you're looking for voters from one particular group. And you dig in, okay, I'm going to take this group, and you guys on the other side of the aisle are going to take this group. And you try to pocket. So why is one group siding with, well, because that's where they're looking or they're hoping to get their votes from. And so, but what's happening is, and what's difficult, like I don't feel represented in my district. I get that nasty email about conservatives from my congressmen, because they're not worried about their constituents as a whole. They're worried about the groups that come out and vote. And we have such a low voter turnout that they only focus on the groups of individuals who actually show up to the polls instead of again, the whole turnout. And then what do we do as a party system when you have a Democrat or Republican who says, nope, I'm going to vote for what's best for my constituents and not necessarily a party line? Then we ream them. We hang them out to dry. Oh, these are the list of the Republicans that joined with Democrats or vice versa on this. Well, did they, or actually are they trying to do what's best for their constituents as a whole, as opposed to just the little pocket people that they consistently get votes from? And that's all I have to say about that. That would be great. I would love to see that happen in our country, but we have to get past this. I'm only going to cater. And how does that happen? It happens by people showing up to vote. If actual people show up to vote, then you could do the blanket politics where I'm going to go for, this issue or this issue, as opposed to just, I only have a certain demographic of people between these ages that show up to vote consistently. So that's who I'm going to target in my politics.
Right. No, so I agree. I think you made my point in terms of the legislative angle is very, very difficult. But if we create, say, the education system, one that, again, is scalable, it is focused on the student, and not only scalable, but offers a variety of alternatives, just we'll keep it at this hour mark, is that that in that imaginary system, we would have opportunities for those who want to send their kids to campus some days and at home some days. But there will be other families who really do need, whether it's the single mom or a family that needs to be able to drop their kid off with preschool, meaning, or before school, if you will, before school care. They get the 7-8 hours, whatever, and then after school care. A good friend in our congregation, he needed that. He was a single dad, and he needed school before school care, after school care. So in that scalable imaginary model, it would cover the gamut. And when that happens, then the very progressive person who normally wouldn't send their child to such a thing finds out I'm using my $50 a month example, that it's so low cost. And because there is this unique focus that their child is going to thrive, then it's going to be harder. Again, there's going to be some number when we go over that point that school is impacted enough financially. The people in the neighborhood realize, whoa, we need to get that budget reduced. That will cross party lines. And at least in that particular school district, there will be enough voices at that school board meeting to make a difference. But I think it has to be the citizens and the body of believers acting first, and then the state will follow. Because does that make sense? Because I agree. Politicians on both sides, they find those groups who do vote, and they use fear, and they're like, your life is going to end. And I realize, oh my goodness, we just have to come together and make something so compelling that it serves this broad piece of the community and makes that impact.
Right. Yes, sir.
And again, that would mean that the church was the answer. That and competition.
Yes, both. Right?
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Competition never makes things worse. Competition always makes things better.
Yeah.
So, and that can be a struggle as well, because you have a monopoly generally with the government.
Yes.
And, we don't have enough time for me to go.
Hey, that could be our next topic, because that's both of y'all have great topics that could be a whole thing. So.
Oh yeah. Well, we'll get on to school so that Travis can monopolize the whole conversation while we're talking about it.
Brian is a great resource, I've learned regarding that. So it would be me and Brian. So yeah.
Yeah, well, that's enough of this kiss up fest. Guys, I thank y'all so much for joining us. And if you have never been introduced to a God Men and you made it this far, thank you. These are some great fellas. We did miss Michael Weedman. We called him the Wall. Big guy, and I saw somebody fight him one time, and they literally climbed up him like a wall, and then he just flicked them off like a mosquito kind of thing, So we did miss him, but guys, I do appreciate y'all joining and being a part of this.
Yes,
and we're gonna keep pushing, because there are going to be better days ahead, whether it's here or over yonder. Thank y'all so much. We'll talk to y'all later.